Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Frugal Noodle, the podcast dedicated to helping you understand money, finance, and retirement, early or otherwise. On last week's episode, we had our second part of the crypto series, where we got a little more in-depth on understanding crypto. We talked about the place that crypto stands in today's world and some of the influences on it. And we will be returning to crypto next week for the third and final part of the crypto series, where we get more involved into exactly how someone might jump on board of the crypto train, as it were. But on this week's episode, we will be talking about something called lifestyle inflation. But as a disclaimer, I am not a financial advisor, and this is not financial advice. This is simply me sharing information as I learn. So on the topic of lifestyle inflation, let's start by describing a scenario or telling a story, one that you may have faced yourself at some point, or in fact, we've all faced it. So maybe not exactly like this one, but you'll get the point. A young man, we'll call him Marky Mark, just because. Marky Mark has been working for a grocery chain for minimum wage for about a year. This was not a hard job to get, and it felt like it. Working part-time just below full-time, so his employer isn't required to provide benefits. Not much of any sign that there's room to move up because all the old-timers have been holding their management positions for decades. Well, after that year of working for less than $15,000 an hour, he ambitiously applies for the much nicer grocer across town. He knows that this place is hiring full-time, pays $3 more an hour starting, and even offers health benefits. It sounds like an unachievable dream to him, but he actually manages to get an interview and he lands the job. This is the catalyst to our first instance of lifestyle inflation in this story. Cha-ching. Marky Mark is already celebrating before he even starts. He's looking at getting some new clothes. He's looking at upgrading his phone. And he even jumps on one of those new streaming services that everyone's talking about. Here we see a somewhat moderate case of lifestyle inflation. Marky Mark hasn't even started working yet, but he knows his paychecks are about to be so much nicer that he's already spending the money he anticipates he'll earn. But it gets worse as it gets better. Marky Mark is making decently better money than he was at his prior job. And so he goes in on an apartment with a friend, takes on a new credit card, buys the latest gaming system. It was a PS4 at the time, if you don't already know who this story is about. Marky Mark earns himself a pretty nifty promotion, which nets him another $2 an hour. And why shouldn't he spoil himself after that? Perhaps with a nicer car. Sure, his 2003 Saturn Vue works just fine and is spacious as all get out, but a young man like him who likes to impress his friends would benefit much more from a 2012 Scion TC. At this point, Marky has been paying a pretty hefty monthly bill on his new coupe and apartment, phone bill, and credit cards. It all racks up. That grocer he works for is acquired from a big online retailer and his position is dissolved and he is therefore let go. He's got a lot of debt and is upside down on that Scion, which he trades in for a more affordable vehicle while working odd jobs. Marky Mark gets into a new industry, which is a much more professional position than his retail years, but the changes he makes as he learns is the most crucial, which is learning to live below his means and avoid lifestyle inflation just because he's making more money. What does Marky Mark do when he takes on a position with the highest pay he's ever had? He gets married, buys an extremely affordable home, sells off a car, pays down debt, and finds any way he can to save money and invest. Call it financial maturity or whatever you will, but Marky Mark does what most people struggle to do. Look at the extra money he's earning as a vehicle for growth, rather than a tool for buying things he's always wanted, or that will symbolize his status. The story is a quick overview of yours truly. There's some watering down, sugarcoating, and gaps that are filled, obviously, but there's a whole lot of truth in this story. My name isn't Marky Mark, but I did take on an auto loan for a 2012 Scion TC that was well out of my budget at the time. That 6-speed manual was fun as heck, though. I took on a lot of debt and made purchases that I was certainly not in the financial capacity to be executing. At least, I should not have been in the financial capacity to execute, but I did. And a lot of us do because it's easy. But what I learned through the misery of truly living paycheck to paycheck just to fund credit cards and lifestyle choices I couldn't afford was that I didn't want to be ruled by my money that I owed. I wanted to rule the money that I owned. So a miraculous thing happened in my little consumerist brain. I was somehow making more money than I'd ever expected to, yet I was phenomenally better about how I spent and saved that money. Would I love a second car that's spacious and has some bells and perhaps some whistles? Well, yes. Can I afford that second car? In the traditional mindset that is willing to take on debt, yes, I can. But in my newfound mindset, I cannot afford it outright. It is not worth it outright, and therefore I cannot afford it. What I've detailed is the cycle of lifestyle inflation that the vast majority of us get sucked into and will rule you to the day you flop if you don't do something to nip it in the bud. You start making more money through a promotion or new job entirely, and you have a celebration by going all out on something fancy like a dinner and buying fancy drinks or a fancy this or that. Then you get the clothes that reflect this change and a car that reflects it as well. Then there's the apartment or house that needs an upgrade. There's the toys like the boat or the RV or both. There are all of these things that we feel obligated to do because our access to greater wealth tells us that we can. But I think the greatest secret to success that should be touted is living below your means. Can you live exactly as you did before after receiving a 10% increase to your salary? What about 25%, 50%, or even more than 100%? I'm not saying that you have to, and if I made 100% more per year than I do now, I would probably justify some room for inflation. But most of us don't suddenly see a 100% increase at any given milestone for our salary. However, we still find a way to adjust our lifestyle so that our demand on our means is higher. It's a game of keeping up with the Joneses that we've conjured up in our heads to keep us spending more and more as we earn more and more. But I'm here to tell you that there's nothing about your image that you should change to impress upon others if it means it will cost you your financial opportunities. But who am I? And if you've yet to achieve any sort of promotion or raise that might encourage some amount of lifestyle inflation, that doesn't mean that you haven't been a victim of it yet. The first instance of lifestyle inflation we are subjected to is often when we land our first job ever. You're suddenly an adult with a mind that is still being developed, and there you find yourself making significantly more money than none at all. And all of these decisions on what to spend it on are available to you in an instant. You can buy the things your parents wouldn't have bought for you, and buy them you will. Honestly, the first instance of lifestyle inflation may be the one that can teach us the most if we're perceptive of its lessons. But to be candid, rarely is the time that any of us learn the lessons of that first instance of lifestyle inflation before we're already off onto the next instance. If you do find yourself questioning how you can do better with the money you're making, whether you've achieved a raise or otherwise, living below your means translates to greater opportunities to put your money to use through investing and paying off debt. Having greater investment portfolios and lesser debts means that it is easier for you to retire earlier. A new car can cost you several $100s a month once your loan payment, insurance, and maintenance are all factored. Several $100s invested a month could pull your retirement in by several years. And if that's not enough motivation, I recommend watching the latest video by Kurzgesagt, which puts into perspective how much of your life remains and what you choose to do with it. Because I liked it so much, I linked it in the show notes below. I won't look at the time a week provides the same ever again. But in the end, I'm not saying you shouldn't enjoy your money. You should. Celebrate with the fancy dinner and drinks. Do a bit to spoil yourself. And ultimately, you don't have to listen to me, but snowballing several financial decisions into others turns into an avalanche that can put you in a worse position than you were in before your raise. But thank you for listening to this episode of Frugal Noodle. It was a pretty simple subject that I wanted to cover. I've touched on it briefly in my TikTok, but I wanted to do a little short break between the crypto episodes, covering something like this. Speaking of crypto, next week we will return to that for part 3, where we talk about how one might jump into crypto and protect themselves from the numerous scams that occupy the space. Be sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. and follow Frugal Noodle on social media in the link below in the show notes. And the music for this episode was produced by Carbs. This is Cody. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next week.